Innocent man spends 46 years in prison before getting revenge on the man that framed him. On a cold winter day in 1979, a friend burst into Richard Phillips' jail cell with news. The man who had framed Phillips for murder had been spotted eating in the prison's chow hall. He was totally defenseless and he was on the move. Phillips strode across the courtyard of the Michigan prison with a steely gaze in his eye and real steel hidden under his sleeve. It had been 7 years since he was incarcerated for a crime he didn't commit, and he was ready to get revenge. Phillips positioned himself outside the chow hall, waiting. As his target came into view, he fell in a few paces behind the man. In just a few moments, they'd turned the corner to a blind spot the guards couldn't see, and Phillips would strike for all the years he'd lost. How did he ever get here? Convinced that he was meting out justice, Phillips stared down Fred Mitchell, weaving through the crowded hall ahead of him, and thought back over the years to when this cruel nightmare began. It had been a day like any other back in 1972. Phillips had spent the day at the Michigan State Fair with his two toddlers, Rita and Richard Jr., riding all the rides and laughing in the photo booth together. That night, however, he went out again and was detained by the police. He was wanted as a suspect of armed robbery alongside Richard Dago Palumbo and Fred Mitchell, a man witnesses thought looked similar to Phillips. Phillips was in deep trouble. He was friends with both of the other suspects, and he didn't have much of an alibi. When it came time for the jury to deliberate between whether Phillips or Mitchell had been at the crime scene, they believed it had been Phillips. Sentenced to 7 years in jail, Phillips hoped for an appeal, but things just got worse. He was still incarcerated in winter 1972 when the body of Gregory Harris, who'd been missing since spring 1971, was found in a field. Days after the body's discovery, Fred Mitchell was arrested on another armed robbery charge and, hoping to lighten his sentence, told police he had information about Harris's killers. He said Palumbo and Phillips had done it. There was no physical evidence. There were no other witnesses. The word of one man who wanted a plea deal was enough for the authorities. They called Phillips and Palumbo into court and after deliberating for just 4 hours, convicted them both of first-degree murder. Phillips' 7-year sentence had turned into a life sentence. He was stunned. At the time the murder had taken place, he didn't even know Palumbo. But that made no difference, his lawyer hadn't let him take the witness stand to speak at the trial. As he handed down Phillips' new sentence, the judge asked if he had any words for the victims. "Not necessarily, Your Honor, except for the fact that I was not guilty, so all I can do is just wait until something develops in my favor," he said. Back behind bars, Phillips buckled down on his resolve to wait it out. He watched as men around him succumbed to the horrors of life on the inside. One man drank shoe glue to permanently avoid rapists. Another threw himself off a balcony, haunted by the things he'd done. Phillips took a job at the prison license plate factory and began saving up. He wrote poetry, songs, and bought a watercolor paint set, teaching himself to paint to ease his troubles while the days and years dragged on. It wasn't enough to keep an innocent man's spirits up, though. Phillips hit a low point. He hadn't seen his children in years after asking his wife not to bring them to the facility for their own protection. When Mitchell appeared in the chow hall, Phillips was ready to avenge his lost freedom, but something itched the back of his mind. "They say you're a murderer. If you kill Mitchell, they'll be right," he thought. "Then you'll never have a chance to get out." Years later, Phillips' appeal sat on the desk of Judge Helen E. Brown. She was stunned while reading it, realizing Palumbo and Phillips had been convicted on Fred Mitchell's testimony alone, a man who she wasn't sure was innocent himself. Then, in Palumbo's own appeal hearing, he made a stunning statement. Seemingly having an urge to do the right thing, he told how, back in June 1971, Fred Mitchell had committed George Harris's murder alone and with no warning, in front of Palumbo's eyes. The officials at Palumbo's hearing were confused. Palumbo's statement hadn't mentioned Richard Phillips at all. "I didn't meet Phillips until July 4, 1971, Palumbo said. July 4 was 8 days after the murder. Phillips was innocent. With the help of the Michigan Innocence Clinic, Palumbo and his attorney pushed to get Phillips a new hearing, and they were successful. On March 28, 2018, 45 years later, prosecutor Kim Worthy officially exonerated Phillips once and for all. "Justice is indeed being done today," she said. By that time, Phillips had painted over 400 paintings while in prison, and after the news broke of his freedom victory, collectors across the world clamored to buy them. He sold many of the paintings for thousands of dollars apiece. In addition, Phillips was awarded a settlement of $1.5 million for his wrongful conviction. He has reached out to his children and is ready to move forward, beginning the first chapter of The Best Revenge. A life well lived. Thank you for watching this fantastic story. Please tap one of the two videos on your screen for another amazing wonder stories.